I used to think it was necessary for our children to sit in our pew with us so that we could keep them contained and under control, but then I realized they behave better with other people than they do with us. So feel free to just grab my kids and have them sit with you. We'll all be better off. So the question this morning is, how do you get by? And I think the truth is, as sung by the Beatles, we all get by with a little help from our friends. Or Joe Cocker sung it too. He might have sung it better than Ringo Starr. But isn't it true that that's how we get by? We all rely on friendship. We all need friends. We all feel this deep need inside of our souls to have friends that will surround us during difficult times, friends that will be with us when we're going through the trials of life. And even the toughest, most iron-willed people, even the most thick-skinned people need friends. Need people to stand up with them during their difficult times. And this morning we're going to read from the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4. I think a window into Paul's need for friendship. Paul's desire for his friends to be with him during what were probably the very last months of his life. And so you can turn to 2 Timothy chapter 4 with me. 2 Timothy 4. Paul, for the most part, does come across in his writing as somebody who's thick-skinned. As somebody who probably doesn't need the same level of friendship as most of us. But in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 6, Paul says, I'm being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. And so this is Paul close to death. This is Paul knowing that he only has maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months, maybe half a year or a year at most before his time is up. And in this state of not having a whole lot of time left, we see maybe a different side of Paul than we see in the rest of his writing. We see him reaching out a little bit. We see him reaching out for those people that he considers to be his friends. We see him a little bit vulnerable. We see him considering his own departure, his own death, and saying, I don't want to be alone when this happens. We see Paul even a little bit weak, in need of some people who can be there to be his strength for him. And so Paul recognizes the truth that no man is an island, no person exists on their own, and we all need to be helped by our friends. And I really think that this is a unique place in all of Paul's writings where he's no longer just thinking of Timothy as his apprentice, as his student, or his son in the faith. He's starting to look at Timothy, his faithful apprentice and student, now as maybe one of his best friends. They've gone from this mentor-apprentice relationship, this student-teacher relationship, to good friends. And so Paul writes to Timothy, and he's going to be asking him, come to me, come quickly, because I need my friends. I need you. And in the same way that Paul expresses this need for friends, we recognize, and this is what I want us to do this morning, we recognize our own need for those people. We recognize our own need for that inner circle, that group of people that we can rely on, that group of people that we can depend on and trust. But I'm willing to bet that all of us have had experience in life where friends have failed us, where we've been maybe deserted, abandoned in our time of need, where we've been wounded in our friendships, and those wounds that we carry with us have made us reluctant to make close friends, reluctant to put ourselves out there again so that we can have close friends. And so as we read these verses that Paul wrote to Timothy, there's three truths that I think just kind of jump out at us. And as we read these truths and we recognize them and we kind of soak in them, I want us to ask ourselves a couple of questions. I want you to ask yourself, what kind of friends do I have? The people that I do count on, the people that I do rely on, what kind of friends are they? Then ask yourself, what kind of friend am I? We're reading about these marks of true friendship. What kind of a friend am I to the people who consider me a friend? And then we're going to ask ourselves, what kind of friend is Jesus? Jesus is the one that really embodies true friendship. Jesus is the one who really sets the example for what a friend should look like. What kind of a friend is Jesus? And then as we realize what a friend is, I want us to challenge ourselves to be the same friend to each other that Jesus is to us. To be a friend to those who are in need the same way that Jesus is a friend to us in our needs. So here are the three truths that we're going to look at today, and they're really simple. You already know them. You don't need to write them down. But the first one is that in your times of need, in your times of difficulty, some people will desert you. Some people they won't be there for you. Some people who you consider to be your friends will not be there for you during the trials of life. Some people will desert you. Some people will stick by you. Some people will be by your side during those difficult moments. Some friends will show the courage to stand by your side. But Jesus will never leave you. Jesus will never forsake you. Jesus will always stand with you. So those are the three truths. Some people will desert you. Some people will stick by you. But Jesus is always with you. So in light of that, Paul says to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 9, because I am being poured out as a drink offering, because my time is short and my departure is near, make every effort to come to me soon. Paul is reaching out to Timothy, who is most likely 1,200 miles away in Ephesus, where he had been working as an evangelist. And Paul is saying, I want you to get here quickly. I want you to come fast. And in thinking about that journey from Ephesus to Rome, 1,200 miles of a little bit of land and a lot of sea in between Paul and Timothy. And Paul is telling Timothy, I need you to be here with me. And that's a lot different from what Paul would usually say to Timothy. For the vast majority of what Paul writes to Timothy, he's telling him, stay in Ephesus, stay there, follow through with the work. You need to be there. You need to be with those people. They need you more than I need you. But Paul's finally at the place where he's saying, no, now I need you to come quickly. Now I need you to show up, because these are my final moments. The end is getting close. And that's one of the marks of true friendship, is that trust that you have, that your friends will show up when you need them to. Have you ever had to do what Paul is asking Timothy to do? To buy that plane ticket, to take that long drive, to drop whatever it is that you're doing so that you can be by the side of one of your friends who is in need. Have you ever had to do that? How many of your friends would do that for you, or have done that for you? When you got that diagnosis from the doctor that things aren't looking good. When you lose your job and you don't know how you're going to make it through the next couple months. When you're having issues in your relationships, in your marriage, do you have those friends that when you say, I need you to get here quickly, they say, okay, I'm on my way. Paul trusted that Timothy would make the right plans in getting from Ephesus to Rome in a quick manner. And quick is kind of, it's almost ironic. You can't get quickly from Ephesus to Rome. There's no quick way in the first century to get from Ephesus to Rome. But Paul's urgency in his final moments is saying, you need to get here soon. And he later will go on to say, come before winter. Come before it gets really cold. Come before it gets really bleak. And so that's one of the marks of true friendship, is the trust that your friends will show up when you need them. Because some people won't. Some people won't be there for you. Your true friends will, but some people, when they realize what's going on in your life, they'll abandon you. They'll desert you. They'll look at your circumstances instead of looking at you, and they'll say, I don't want to deal with that. I don't have what it takes to handle that with you. And that's what happens with somebody named Demas. Look at verse 10. 2 Timothy 4, verse 10. Paul tells Timothy, make every effort to come to me soon, because Demas, having loved this present world, or this present age, has deserted me, and he's gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia. Titus has gone to Dalmatia. And so Paul mentions Demas as this person who he thought was his friend, who he thought would be with him during his trial, during his last moments. And yet, Demas has decided that he doesn't want to stick around. Some people will desert you. Some people will abandon you. And Paul was feeling the effects of abandonment. Paul was feeling that pain that comes when somebody who you counted on shows themselves as someone who you can't actually trust and who you can't actually count on. And we really do experience a wounded spirit when people do that to us. When somebody who you thought was going to be there for you doesn't show up, that wounds you. And even the people who don't want to recognize it or who don't want to admit it, it wounds you. It hurts you. You carry that wound with you. And so you can read Paul saying, well, Demas has loved this present world. He's loved comfort and security over being here with me. You might read a little bit of anger in Paul's tone of voice that Demas preferred this present world. But I think Paul's speaking out of his woundedness. Paul's speaking out of a place of a friend who has been betrayed. That the same way that Judas betrayed Jesus, Demas has betrayed Paul for the world and for comfort. These other two, Crescens and Titus, it doesn't say that they abandoned Paul, and most likely they were off doing church work, and they just simply couldn't be there with Paul. But Demas, he had left Paul behind. And I think Paul carries that wound with him, the same way that we carry those wounds with us. And it causes us to be reminded that true friends are constant. True friends are anchors in our lives. True friends are the people who are there when things get tough. They're not fair weather friends. When things get stormy, they're still there with us. They don't leave us. And Paul did have somebody who was present with him. Read verse 11. Paul says, only Luke is with me. Only Luke is with me. So Paul wasn't totally alone. And he's not saying only Luke is with me in the sense that, well, it's only Luke that's with me. It's like, I prefer if somebody else was with me. He's not saying, it's just Luke. He's saying, I would be alone, but Luke is with me. It's that sense that I'm not totally alone. I do have one good friend with me, and it's Luke. Now, this is the same Luke who wrote the Gospel of Luke, the same Luke who wrote the book of Acts. And we're not exactly sure in what sense he is with Paul. Is he in prison with Paul? Is he just visiting Paul on a daily basis as his trial gets closer and closer? We're not exactly sure, but we know that it is of great comfort for Paul to have Luke with him. And as Paul's days start to run out, he's saying, I want to have my close friends nearby. I want to have my good friends nearby. Now, isn't it true that just the mere presence of somebody during your trials can be the greatest comfort that you'll ever receive? Better than any medicine that takes the pain away, better than any good news that you're going to get a job after you've lost one. The best feeling of comfort comes when we just have somebody with us. When there's somebody who's willing to put their arm around us. Somebody who's willing to embrace us. Somebody who's just willing to be present. It's going to sound funny, but there actually exists a whole industry that is devoted to providing that presence. And it was kind of pioneered in Portland, of course. And so have you ever heard of cuddle therapy? Cuddle therapy, where you pay somebody to embrace you, to give you a hug. John, you're shaking your head, but if you ever need a hug, I won't charge you, okay? Cuddle therapy is a real thing. And it sounds a little bit silly, but it speaks to the truth that sometimes we just need somebody with us. Sometimes we don't need profound words. We don't need a psychologist to tell us our inner workings. We don't need deep, enlightening spiritual truths. We just need somebody with us. And I think Luke, being present in Paul's life, reminds us that the only thing that you need in order to minister to somebody, the only thing that you have to possess in order to minister to somebody who is in need, is the willingness to be present in their life. You don't need to be a psychologist. You don't need a degree in counseling. You don't need deep spiritual truths to share. And you don't need anything other than the willingness to say, I'll be by your side. I'll be present. And so you can be somebody's Luke. You can be somebody's Luke and be present in their life during those difficult moments. He also tells Timothy, pick up Mark and bring him with you, because he's useful to me for service. Tychicus I have sent to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak which I left at Troas with Carpus, and the books, especially the parchments. Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. The Lord will repay him according to his deeds. Be on guard against him yourself, for he vigorously opposed our teaching. And then he says in verse 16, at my first defense, no one supported me, but all deserted me. May it not be held against them. Paul is referring to his first trial, his first preliminary hearing, his first appearance before the court, in this trial where he was going to be judged. If you remember, he appealed to Caesar when he was being accused of a rabble-rouser, of a rebel, of a disturber of the peace. He mentioned the fact that he was a Roman citizen, and that kind of complicated the issue. It wasn't the local government that could take care of the issue with Paul now. He was appealing to the emperor. And so as this trial plays out, Paul says that at his very first defense, his very first showing before the court, no one was there to support him. No one stood by his side. And that's a shame. That reality that we are abandoned at times by the people that we thought would show up for us. But the interesting thing here is that Paul says, may it not be counted against them. Paul has this ability to forgive the people that didn't show up for him. He's willing to forgive the people who didn't stand by his side, by his own side. And so not only does he say, well, I forgive the people that didn't show up at my court date, that didn't show up at my hearing, but earlier on, in verse 11, he said, pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he's useful to me in service. Now here's the thing. If you remember back in Acts, Mark was the one who had abandoned Paul on his very first missionary journey. And it had actually caused this big division between Paul and Barnabas, because Paul said, I don't want to take Mark because he's going to abandon us on the second missionary journey. Barnabas said, no, we should take Mark, and that caused this big division. But somewhere in the middle of the story, Paul had forgiven him. Paul had healed that wound. Paul had reconciled with Mark, and now he's saying, bring Mark to me, because I need him. He's good. He's a good minister. He's useful to me for service. And that's another mark of true friendship. And now Paul's showing us one of these marks. Paul is showing us that forgiveness needs to play a role in our friendships. That the ability and the willingness to forgive needs to be a part of our friendships. And we know that in order to be mentally and emotionally healthy, we need to be able to forgive. We need to be able to move on. We need to be able to accept others' apologies. But what about those times when nobody's asking for forgiveness, where nobody recognizes the wrong that they did to you? How do you forgive in those moments? And something that I've learned about forgiveness just over the years, really deep, profound truth. You ready for it? There's no special secret formula to forgiveness. There is no easy way to forgive. There is no simple way to forgive. When you are wounded by somebody else, that's a complex thing. And you will struggle with that. And it's never just as easy as saying, it's okay, or it's fine. It's never that easy. And there's things that we can do to move in the direction of forgiveness, but true forgiveness is very difficult to show. And sometimes we tell people, well, you need to forgive, you need to move on, you need to do this. But it's oftentimes not that easy. What can we do to be like Paul, who chooses to forgive Mark, who chooses to forgive even the people that don't show up for him at his trial? We have to think that Paul probably remembered how much he had been forgiven, all the wrong that he had done to others, and yet Jesus forgave him. So that's a good place to start. In order to forgive others, we remember how much we've been forgiven. Another aspect of it is just that, on my own, I don't know if I can forgive. And so you pray for God to work in your heart. You pray for the Spirit to move you in the direction of forgiveness, to convict you that it is necessary to forgive. And then a part of it, too, is just coming to a place where you say, I've been wounded, I've been hurt, I don't want to forgive, this person isn't even asking me to forgive, but God has seen what happened. God knows my pain. God sees how I was mistreated, and that's enough for me. But there is no special formula for forgiveness. But it does need to be a part of our relationships. So even when Paul had nobody standing by his side, he wasn't completely alone. He says in verse 17, the Lord stood with me. In my first offense, nobody supported me. But in verse 17, he says, the Lord stood with me. And he strengthened me, so that through me the proclamation might be fully accomplished, and that all the Gentiles might hear. And I was rescued out of the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil deed, and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. And so Paul, even in the moments where he truly was by himself, completely and utterly alone, standing face to face with the opposition, in a very real trial where there was very real danger present. Like he says, in the mouth of the lion, the lion's den, Paul recognizes that his one true friend was there with him. That Jesus had never left him. Jesus had never forsaken him. In the Roman society, there were a group of nobles who were called patroni. And that's where we get the word patron. And these patrons would show up at people's trials, and they would support the accused. They would show up and stand at the accused side to kind of throw some weight behind their testimony and to try to sway the decision of the court. And Paul says, I didn't have a patronus, I didn't have a patron, I didn't have an advocate, I didn't have anybody speaking on my behalf, and yet Jesus was with me. He was my patron. He was my advocate. He was by my side. And I want you to think about your own life right now. In every moment in your life that you have considered to be extremely difficult, where you felt the weight of the world against you, where you felt true opposition, whether it was medical or financial or spiritual or emotional, whatever it is you were up against. And I want you to really think, was Jesus with you in that moment? The answer is yes. Jesus was with you. And if Jesus was with you then, Jesus is with you right now. Whatever it is you're facing, whatever it is you're dealing with. And if Jesus was with you and is with you right now, it means that he will always be with you. Jesus will always be your advocate. Jesus will always be at your side. And so recognizing this, that Jesus embodies the marks of true friendship. That Jesus is the one who lives these things out in our lives. that we can trust in Jesus, that we can know that He will be constant, that we can know that His presence will always be there, that we can know that He will forgive us when we wrong Him, to know that He will advocate for us. Then that hole in our hearts where we know we need a true friend can be filled. Jesus fills that place. But recognizing that, we need to be challenged to live that out also. To be the friend to others that Jesus is to us. To be somebody's Luke. To be somebody's Timothy. To be somebody's Mark. To be present. To show up. To not say anything. To not give our opinion. But just to be with each other when things get rough. We need to be challenged to do that. And if this message challenges you, I ask that you would respond to it. If it's just the reality that you realize that you haven't had that friend in your life, that Jesus hasn't been one of your friends because you've never seen Him in that light, and you felt like you've been alone, and you felt like there hasn't been anybody by your side, then the invitation this morning is to befriend Jesus, to recognize Him as your true friend, to put Him on in baptism and live life no longer alone, but with the presence of Jesus, with the friendship that Jesus provides. But maybe you're hearing this message and it's kind of pointing out the pain in your life because somebody's wounded you, somebody's abandoned you, somebody's deserted you like Demas abandoned Paul. And maybe that's something that you haven't really dealt with, and that pain is just kind of overtaking your life, and it's all you can think about, and it's just on your mind. That sounds like something that needs to be prayed for. And so the invitation would be to come forward and ask for prayers, for healing, for strength, for friends. But maybe this is convicting you because you're the one that's abandoned somebody, because you're the one that didn't show up for somebody. And if that's the case, then you can confess that, and you can be met with grace and mercy and love from this group of friends. And you can move on and receive that forgiveness. But whatever your need is, come forward now and stand and sing the song of invitation.